Welcome back. In our last video, we learned about what biomolecules are. So today we are going to learn about the classification of carbohydrates. So what are carbohydrates? Carbohydrates are polyhydroxyaldehydes or ketones or substances that yield such compounds on hydrolysis. So before we jump into the complex chemical structure, we need to know that how are these carbohydrates classified so that we can understand the complex structures of the carbohydrate. So just by using our human senses, we can classify this carbohydrate, that is through organoleptic method of classification. So where it uses the sense of taste, sense of smell, sense of texture, sense of vision and sense of hearing to classify the group of substances. In carbohydrate, we classify them based on the sense of taste and texture into two simple categories, that is sugars and non-sugars. So sugars are also called as saccharides. Non-sugars are also called as complex sugars or polysaccharides. So the sugars are the crystalline solid structure and they dissolve easily in the water and they have sweet taste. On the other hand, the non-sugars or the complex sugars or the polysaccharide, they have an amorphous powdery texture that is seen in the starch, as well as they also have a fibrous texture that can be seen in the cellulose. So they do not dissolve well in the cold water as well as they don't dissolve well in the hot water. Some substances swell to form thick gel-like substances in the hot water by the process of gelatinization as seen in the starch, and they are also tasteless or they have a bland taste. So organoleptic testing is a fantastic quick way to sort carbohydrates in kitchen or basic lab, but to truly understand them we have to look at the chemical structure, which we will be discussing later in the later videos. So the sugars can further be classified into monosaccharides and oligosaccharides. So monosaccharides are the simplest sugars and they cannot be hydrolyzed into simple units. These monosaccharides can further be classified based on the carbon atom they contain, as well as they can be classified based on the functional group they contain. So based on the carbon atom they contain, they can be classified into trioses, which means they have 3 carbon in them. Tetroses, which means they have 4 carbon in them. Pentoses, which means they have 5 carbons in them. Hexoses, which means they have 6 carbon. And heptoses, which means they have 7 carbon in them. Similarly, they can be classified based on the functional group they contain. Aldoses are the aldehyde functional group. They are also called as the aldo sugars. So they can be glycerose, erythrose, ribose, glucose, glucoheptose. Similarly, the ketoses have a ketone functional group and they can also be called as the keto sugars. So they have dihydroxyacetone, erythrulose, ribulose, fructose, soda heptulose as the best examples. So both these characters, that is the number of carbon atoms and the nature of functional group present, may also be combined into one. Thus, for example, glycerose or glyceraldehyde. So it is an aldotriose. Aldotriose means it has an aldehyde functional group and 3 carbon. And similarly, the ribulose, it is a ketopentose. And glucose, it is an aldohexose. So ribulose is a ketopentose, means ribulose have a ketone group as its functional group and it has 5 carbon backbone in it. And similarly, the glucose is an aldohexose, which means it has 6 carbons in it. So it is noteworthy that except fructose, ketoses are not as common as aldoses. So the most abundant monosaccharide in nature is the 6 carbon sugar, that is D-glucose. So sometimes a distinction is named between the aldoses and ketoses. So the suffix oses is kept reserved for the aldoses and the suffix uloses is used for the ketoses. Thus glucose is a hexose and ketose is a fructose, and which is the hexulose. However, a few ketoses are named otherwise, like the fructose, which is derived from the Latin word fructus, which means fruit, as fruits are a good source of this sugar. On the other hand, oligosaccharides or oligosaccharoses, they are compound sugars. They yield 2 to 10 molecules of the same or different monosaccharides on hydrolysis. So they are strictly classified based on the hydrolysis, unlike the monosaccharides. These oligosaccharides can further be classified into disaccharide, trisaccharide, tetrasaccharide, pentasaccharide, and so on till 10 units. So the disaccharides, best example are the sucrose, lactose, maltose, cellobiose, trehalose, gentiobiose, and mellibiose. The trisaccharides best example are the rhamninose, gentianose, raffinose, rabinose, and melizitose. The best example for tetrasaccharide are stachyos, corodos, and the best example for pentasaccharide are verbascos. Finally, we have the polysaccharide. So the word poly means many and saccharide means sugar. So they have many sugar molecules in them. So these are the massive macromolecule made of more than 10 monosaccharide, often 100 monosaccharide or even 1000 monosaccharide units linked together to form a polysaccharide. Because they are so complex, they are completely tasteless non-sugars. So we divide them in two types, that is homopolysaccharide and heteropolysaccharide. So the homopolysaccharide are made of only one monosaccharide repeating unit, and the heteropolysaccharide are the mixture of different type of monosaccharide like hyaluronic acid and heparin. Example of homopolysaccharide are the starch and glycogen, and the example of heteropolysaccharide are the hyaluronic acid and heparin. So in the next video, I will be discussing the classification in more detail. So before closing, one thing I want to say is that in few textbooks, you will find that oligosaccharide consists of 3 to 10 units, and in few textbooks you will find that oligosaccharide yield 2 to 10 monosaccharide units on hydrolysis. So don't get confused, because disaccharide is so common and very important abundant oligosaccharide. So they keep this disaccharide as a completely separate category. That is, they classify the carbohydrate into monosaccharide, disaccharide, oligosaccharide and polysaccharide. So don't get confused. As disaccharide is very common, they have kept it. The correct classification of carbohydrate is the monosaccharide, oligosaccharide and polysaccharide. So thank you for watching.